Thank you. Good evening, members, officers, and anyone joining us in the public. Welcome to the Executive 14th of February. Good planning that it's Valentine's Day. I'm sure everybody else would have had plans, but you've given them up to be here, so thank you. All right. Apologies for absence. I believe we have a few.
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor Sarah Jane Croke, Councillor Rebecca Jennings-Evans and Councillor Adrian Page.
Okay, thank you. And just to confirm that with 4 of us out of the 7, we're still quorate. Yes? Okay, thank you. Members of the Executive, minutes from the 17th of January, are you happy for me to sign them? All right, item 3, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest, pecuniary or non-pecuniary, in any of the items we're going to be discussing this evening? Okay. I'm going to declare that I have a non-pecuniary interest in the London Road Rec Sill grant for re-tarmacking the path because I live next door to the park, but it's non-pecuniary. Oh, Councillor Whitcroft.
Can I just, good evening, sorry, can I just check with you, if we are not obviously on the executive, do we need to declare interest or not?
I always advise that if you're in any doubt at all, declare an interest, right? Because you won't be criticised by me or anyone else for declaring an interest, but you don't want to be in a position that later on somebody says, oh, you spoke on that item, you tried to persuade the executive to go a certain way, and yet you didn't declare an interest at the start. So my advice is, if you're in doubt, Councillor Whitcroft, then I would declare.
Right, could I declare then on item 7, please? Just that obviously the Mayor's charity is arranging the event this year for the King's Coronation celebration, and in due course could well apply for a grant under this scheme. Okay.
So that I think you mean item 11, which is the Coronation Grant Scheme.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
that's okay. Yeah, no problem.
I've got different windows. I've different bits open.
I wondered
so,
what
yes,
you were
I
doing,
do, please.
You know, declaring about supporting small businesses relief scheme with their rates.
No.
That's okay. Yep.
Thank you, but no.
That's fine. That way, if you speak on it, then you've declared. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Alloway.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, just on the side of caution, on the item for questions for the Leader, I'd like to declare an interest by being a board member of the Surrey Association of Local Councils.
Okay. All right. Are there any others? No. Okay. Right. I'll just have a quick check with the monitoring officer. It's a non-pecuniary interest with the Sill one for St Michael's, the thing, and I obviously live next to it. Am I required to abstain or withdraw or anything like that, or can I vote on the item?
Thank you, Leader. There are no issues with your participation in the item, and you're entitled to participate and vote on the item.
Thank you very much. Okay. Right. Item 4, questions from members, for myself or any of the members of the executive who are here. Councillor Alloway.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, my question is regarding Sill, actually. The government is pledging to look at Sill spending rules during the review of the NPPF, levelling up and planning systems. The many parish, town and community councils have been concerned about a level of Sill money they can access where the location is taking significant development. The infrastructure needs for hundreds of new residents in a ward ranges across the age demographics for recreation, education, public buildings and improvements, highway safety, and connectivity to amenities. Could the executive undertake a review of the Surrey Heath Borough Council current still application policy to deliver infrastructure improvements, especially in locations where significant development occurs? Thank you.
Okay. You were a little bit crackly there, but you're asking the executive to review our SIL policy, particularly about trying to spend more of the money where the development happens in the ward that it happens in. Yep. Okay. Well, I'm certainly happy to look at that. You mentioned to me outside before that you were thinking about putting a motion forward to council for that, knowing that this is an executive function to look at SIL. Are you still putting a motion forward, Councillor Allaway?
Yes, I would like to, as we're getting a bit close to the what we used to call PERDA, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yes, if that's okay.
right.
I'd like to get that one in so that we do get an answer to it.
Okay. Well, I'm very happy to look at it, and the officers can work with me, and I'm happy to work with you to look at how SIL is currently allocated and what we might do to improve that. I'm going to be cognizant of what the council says, although it will direct it back to the executive, but it will no doubt there'll be discussion about it, and I'll be very interested to hear what the council has to say about that, and I'll be looking to take as much of that as I can into account. Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions for myself or members? I don't see it, but Councillor Wheeler? Can't see it. Oh, there's
Thank you,
Councillor
Leader. It's just in, sorry, my picture wasn't on until I started speaking. Never smoked in my life. It's just in relation to an earlier item where we discussed the possibility of Thames Water being to come in. I may well have missed that being scheduled, but I just wondered where we had got to on it, please, and if it's possible to have an update.
I think from memory, we're talking about when the water was gushing out into the street for like 5 days or 7 days or something, and you asked me to.
Let's try nearer 5 months.
It was gushing for 5 months. Okay. You asked me to see if the external partnership committee would bring the water company in for a discussion. I immediately after the executive spoke to the chair of that partnership committee, and she was very on board with getting them in. So I can't tell you where they have reached with getting them in, but I'm more than happy to get you an answer in the next few days. I'll ask where they are on that. But I asked the chair immediately after the executive meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. It's not just in relation to the water that they didn't fix. There's also in relation to a large number of dispersal matters from one of the local plants in Chobham.
Okay.
So there's a number of things generally. Thank you.
All right, no problem. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? No? Okay. Right. Okay, we're on to item 5, the annual plan. This is my paper. Okay. So members, obviously every year we have an annual plan. We agree the annual plan. It's in line with taking another step towards the 5-year strategy, which the council passed. So these are the kind of the stepping stones, the 5 stepping stones to delivering the 5-year strategy. The plan has been before the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee, and their input is in 2.1 and is very welcome. I think if we resolve to agree the plan, it's subject to the approval of the annual budget by full council. Right? There are 36 pages and around 100 targets. So I'm not going to go through them one by one and discuss the pros and cons of each one. But what I will do is just ask for any questions or comments. I'm sure everyone has diligently worked their way through the 36 pages and the 100 targets. we used to have a councillor who would have pointed out every typo and comma that was in the wrong place. Right. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm not seeing any comments. All right. What I would do before we just go to the resolution on page 9 is that I'd just like to thank the officers. An annual plan is a huge undertaking. It's not just an iteration of the year before. There's a whole review of the whole thing. I think the officers have worked really, really well with the members of the executive. I actually think this was probably the most thorough annual plan we've put together, certainly since I've become leader. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that we appreciated what you did. So thank you very much. Okay. On page 9 then, members of the executive, we're advised to resolve that the annual plan 23-24, as attached to Annex A to the agenda report, be agreed, subject to the approval of the annual budget 23-24 at full council on the 22nd of February 2023. Okay, right, and he would have pointed out that typo right there. Okay, are we agreed? Okay. Thank you. Right, item 6, Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Leader. This next paper asks the Executive to recommend to full council on the 22nd of February the adoption of the revenue budget estimates for the financial year 23-24 and the medium-term financial strategy for the periods 23-24 up to 26-27. Full details in the report include details of the expected increases in operational costs and efficiencies and improvements in income expected to be gained in the period. It also details the proposed use of reserves and details of the capital strategy and programme and reserves and the treasury management strategy, which all form part of the medium-term financial strategy. Bit of a mouthful, sorry about all that. It also includes the recommendation that the annual tax precept for 23-24 be increased by 2.99% across all council tax bands. The main background to these proposals is the fact that the whole country, including Surrey Heath, has during the past few months experienced a sudden unusual spike in the annual rate of inflation. This has exceeded 10% and has had an impact on all areas that affect the borough's operational costs. These include energy, subcontracted services, staff costs, and almost everything we buy in. At the same time, central government has restricted the amount by which we can increase our main source of income, council tax, to a maximum of 3%. And that's obviously given us a problem. Our estimated net revenue budget cost for service provision for the 23-24 year is 17.468 million, whilst our funding stream from the usual sources is only 13.676 million, a 3.79 million difference. There are many other boroughs and districts that have had to face this dilemma this year, and they've been left with no other choice but to cut services and overhead costs. I'm pleased to be able to advise that, thanks to the historically prudent financial management of this council, we will not have to take this type of action. We will be able to maintain the high level of services that we provide to our communities. We have sufficient reserves that can be used in combination with further improvements and efficiencies, which are detailed in the paper, to bridge this gap for several years, whilst we move in a controlled way to a more balanced budget. Full details of our reserve balances are detailed in the report. This draft proposal was presented to the Borough's Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee on January 25th. The main concern raised there was regarding the Star Chamber exercise, which has a target of 500k in savings / increases in income, which has been included in the budget. This issue has been reviewed again, and all concerned have confirmed their opinion that it is a very achievable target to include. In fact, the action has already been taken in the light of looking at the year during the current financial year, which will result in a far better financial outcome than was originally estimated. The recommended recommendation is that the draft budget and medium-term financial strategy be recommended for approval by Council on February 22nd. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, in there, there's, as you just said, there's a recommendation that council tax be increased by 2.99% across the bands, which, as I understand it, for a band D is 21 pence a week. Is that right? Yeah. About, yeah, £7-8 a year. Okay. All right. Okay. Obviously, we'd rather not be increasing it, but what it does do is it gives us the ability to then use that to provide services and, of course, to make sure that the programs that we've got in place to help the people at the most needy, the most reliant on assistance, is able to get it. So, okay. Any questions for Councillor Perry on the revenue budget and medium-term financial strategy? Councillor Bates.
Yes, thank you. I'm not going to comment about the political aspects of that because we'll obviously have that discussion next week. But I just have some technical questions that either he might be able to answer or perhaps Mr. Watson, which are of a more kind of factual nature. So firstly, turning to page 85, the question is whether 85.
85.
Yeah, this is in relation to the service growth items, and quite wisely, I think, at the time, there was various proposals for inflationary areas in regard to utilities and gas in particular. And obviously that was correct at the time of this report. But since then, the world has moved on and prices, particularly for gas, are coming down. So I just wonder whether those figures are still correct in terms of looking forward with regard to prices coming down, or whether in fact that might be slightly higher than is necessary. That's the first question.
I know you've got a couple of questions, so let me just take that one. Assuming your next one isn't related to the gas and electric.
Correct, it isn't.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is it?
No, it's not.
No. So, Mr. Watson, are we happy with the inflationary estimates that you've put in?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Thank you.
Utilities?
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Yes, I'm still happy that the estimates we put in there are to the best estimate we can put in. A lot of these are based on our contracts, which will use inflation indicator set at a point of time, be it the 1st of January, 1st of December. So therefore, the prevailing rates at the time are the ones we've used for setting our contractual inflation uplift. Now, obviously, like you, I would hope to see that the prices come down. I know the price of wholesale gas has dropped. It all depends on what forward dealing has been done by the utility suppliers. And if they have done forward deals, they're then locked in at possibly a higher price than they're currently seeing right now. But it will take possibly 12 months for the reduction to start working its through into next year's budget. So if we do find it drops during the year, it will be an underspend on the service areas, which would be welcomed, and we'll probably go towards some of our savings target.
Thank you. Councillor Bates?
If it's easier, I'm happy to do the other three en masse.
Okay, go ahead.
They're all short. They're all short.
Right.
So the next point was on page 91, and is we have and this has been agreed already, but in regard to the managed vacancy factor of £100,000 for the pay award, that I know has been agreed, but it's purely a practical process in terms of what does that actually mean. So for the sake of argument, a member of staff leaves the organisation. Does that mean that we will then have an extended period of time when that post is vacant, potentially having an impact to the organisation, or what practically does that mean? So that's question number one. Question number two relates to page 105 and the disabled facilities grants and the explanation, which is in relation to the capital scheme. And there's an explanation on the final part of that. I'll just give you a bit of time to find page 105. But if you look at the explanation on the right-hand side, it says that the level of expenditure will flex to match the level of funding provided. Now, what I've understood by that statement is in effect that that although £780,000 has been, if you like, put into our budget for each of those 4 years, that doesn't necessarily mean that 780,000 will come out of it. It may be more than that, it may be less, but that in effect, whatever is spent is recouped. And I just wanted to clarify if that was actually correct, because if it was correct, I'm not sure why we would need a contingency budget for it, which we then go on to include later on page 109. But that may be just a misunderstanding. The final point, I think, is perhaps the most relevant for communities, and probably the one, the previous one's been more technical, but this is, I think, more important, which is on page 135. And that relates to these various funds and reserves that we have. And you'll see there's quite a long list of funds and reserves. And the one which is of particular interest to me for historical reasons, but it's actually one of the smallest, which is the Old Dean Toddlers Playground. And the question is, where does the interest in those reserves go? Because we were always promised that the interest in that reserve, which up to now has been not much, but is now going up, should remain in that reserve. Now, on £17,000, that would be about £340, which isn't very much, but might buy some refurbishment of a bench and things like that. But obviously, on some of the other figures, that is a lot more. So I guess, where does that interest go? But certainly with regard to that specific account, it was always understood the interest would remain in that account. It would not be used for subsidising wider council services. And I just would like that reassurance again, for the benefit of Old Dean residents, that continues to be the case.
Okay, so obviously Mr. Watson's going to take those three. Staff and vacancies, the extended vacancies, talking about the agreement with the staff, with the pay rise. Disabled facility grant flexing and the Old Dean Reserve. Who gets the interest? Okay.
Thank you very much, Leader and Councillor Bates. The managed vacancy factor is something that we agreed when we did the pay award back in November, and it was agreed there. It will be affected by, as you say, a certain period of gapping between a post being recruited to if it's left vacant. Now, that's not means every post in the council that is vacant will be held pending someone coming in, and there's a certain natural amount of vacancy built into it, because by the time you've gone out to recruitment and then you've gone down through the whole selection process and then you've given the people the contract and they've given their notice, it builds in a vacancy factor as well and that sort of things. But what we will do is actively manage it. So every time a post needs to be filled because someone's given notice or is leaving, it goes through a process where it gets approved by, first of all, myself around the budgets. HR look at it for the recruitment side, and then the head of paid service will also say yes or no. And what we'll do is put the challenge in at that point to the service. Can you hold this post open for a bit longer than normal recruitment? Which will then hopefully make that £100,000 extra managed vacancy factor. So it's something that we'll do. We can't put it into the service areas because we don't know which service areas will get a churn and a turnover of staff. So it'd be unfair to try and distribute it across all, equally across the various services in the council. But when we do get a vacancy come through, we'll always look to try and hold it open just those little couple of weeks, months longer to make sure we try and make that factor. And we will track it as part of our budget monitoring process as well. So moving on to disabled facilities grants. This is a grant, or this is a funding stream for capital that is 100% funded. It used to require match funding in the old days, going back to the 2010 type, but recently it's always been funded. It comes in through the Better Care Fund, distributed by the county, but has to be passed down to us to do facility grants improvements. And the talk about flexing on it is really making sure that we will spend all the money we get in one way or another before, so there's no case of it being clawed back. So if you get more money coming in, because occasionally we will get extra money as other councils hand back money to the county and the Better Care Fund, it then gets redistributed back out to those that are spending it. So we'll have a process where we will try and spend every single penny we can get our hands on from the county or from the government that provides the money for it. And the Old Dean Toddler Playground, what will happen is we don't invest these pots of money individually. They all form part of our treasury strategy. And that will then get the amount shared out. Now, I don't know here and now, have we put money into Old Dean Toddler's Playground for the interest? I will go back though and have a look, and if we have got an area where there's interest that's going to be added to them, because not all of these earmark reserves will get them, but again, as you say, it shouldn't be depleting the value of that fund because we haven't been spending the money. So I'll look to see it and see which ones need interest adding, and when necessary, I will add the interest in. Just to be clear on it though, the interest returns haven't been that good for the last couple of years.
Thank you, Mr Watson. Just give Councillor Bates a chance to come back before I go to Councillor Rise.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I agree that many of those funds are not, the interest wouldn't be accepted over, but I welcome the fact that you look at all of those to double check, because some of those are restricted funds and therefore the interest should remain restricted within that account. And certainly that was the case with Old Dean. That money was raised by local residents with money from Accent Peerless. Many will remember that. But the reason I raised it is actually because it was the project, or the pet project of my late colleague Margaret Mower. Many of you will remember that. So that is obviously an important area for us locally. And we're keen to make sure that even if it's £200 or £100, that money can be used and would be wisely used. Just going back to the disabled facilities grants, I'm not sure I actually did get an answer as to why there's a contingency for it. My understanding is what you've just said, but we in fact appear, if you add up the centralised capital contingency that is then outlined on page 109, that includes 10% contingency on disabled facilities grants, but I'm not sure why we would need it. So in essence, it seems to me on the face of it, from what has just been said, that rather than needing £254,000 contingency, we could reduce that by £78,000 by not needing 10% contingency for disabled facilities grants. It gives me the impression that in essence 10% of the whole capital schemes were put forward, which is wise for most of them, but not necessarily for this one, because it is actually a scheme where you only spend what you receive. So that was the reason for the query. Do we actually need that 78,000 in contingency? Because I think it's probably different to the rest.
Mr Watson, yeah?
Yes.
Makes a good point.
No, it is a very good point, and your mathematics is perfectly correct. The reason we had the contingency in there, and it came through as a recommendation from the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee when looking at the Task and Finish group on the public realm works, and it is an arbitrary 10% figure of the capital programme cost. Now, it's not been allocated to every single project in there, as it's a centralised contingency, so it's an amount that's gone in there like that. And the beauty of a centralised contingency is that it's more tightly controlled than just giving it to each of the individual cost centres and the projects, which means hopefully we won't spend it all. So any contingency that's not spent will be an underspend on the annual capital budget anyway. But it does give that flexibility in there. Now, if you want to be purist, we could say, let's exclude all those projects that have their own contingency amounts in there, all the ones that are actually grant funded. And you could take that 78,000 out. I would suggest that the figure we have in for contingency is probably a good figure to use, given the fact that it is going to be tightly controlled and only drawn down as and when needed on the projects.
Okay, thank you. I can see you don't agree, Councillor Bates, but I'm going to move on to Councillor Rise. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Two questions. On page 68 under Legal and Democratic Services Strategic Management, it does not provide any figures for the final budget of 22-23 and the annual budget, and then the number of employees full-time equivalent. whereas all the other sections do. I think that's just clearly a mistake. If that could be included, please. And also under 3.8 planning on page 69, it's showing a reduction of the budget of around £485,000 for planning. And I'm just wondering, as a statutory function of the council, I do apologise if my camera's going a bit crazy. It seems to be on the blink. I do apologise. I'm turning that off. Obviously, with a reduction of a very key function of this council, are we confident that the planning department will have the required funding, especially with the potential changes to the local plan process under the potential changes from central government? Thank you.
Thank you. Just to be clear, we could still hear you perfectly well, but you're right, your picture went a bit wonky. I think on 3.7, I just need a nod. This is on page 12 of 26 or page 68 of your papers. Is that an oversight that the numbers aren't there in the plan? Oh, okay. Okay. So I'm being told that those numbers are in the updated supplement. Still, I'm not sure how that explains why it's not on this page. Will they be added to the page?
They've been reissued, the papers, on Monday.
Okay, so the papers are going to be updated and the numbers will be in there, Councillor Rise.
They've been done.
Okay, I'm told it has been done. All right. And, okay, and Mr. Watson, I think I know the answer about, it's going to be about income, isn't it, on 3.8? It's not a reduction, it's just a different spend. Okay, so 3.8?
Yes, it's on the planning. Part of it is a reduction, an increase in the amount of income expected as per the Star Chamber that was agreed during this current financial year. And the other part of it is there's two amounts of money put in as one-off budget for the local planning consultancy working around that budget. So obviously as it's one-off, that then comes out. So rather than the figure for 23-24 being understated, the figure for 22-23 was overstated by those two elements of one-off budget.
Okay. Councillor Rise?
Thank you.
That answer your questions?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, okay, thank you. All right. Are there any other questions on this paper, Revenue Budget Medium-Term Financial Strategy? No? Okay. Right. So, members of the executive, there's a lot of the recommendations. We're advised to recommend to full council the medium-term financial strategy and associated revenue budget estimates covering the period 2023-24 to 26-27, as set out in Annex A of this report, and its appendices be approved, including, I'm going to just list them, small 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They're all there in your papers. And the executive is also advised to note small 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Are we agreed? Great. Thank you. Okay. Right, item 7, supporting small business relief scheme. Councillor Perry, you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. In his autumn statement, the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced the 2023 SSBR scheme. That's a supporting small business relief scheme, which is an updated version of the original, which was introduced in 2017. The scheme is linked to the recent revaluation of commercial properties for the business rate purposes. Surrey Heath Borough Council has 2,960 business properties, of which 993 receive small business relief. The SSBRS caps at a max £600 per annum any increase in business rates levied on a small business that has been, due to the revaluation, lost its small business relief allowance. So it's capped it by £600. It's estimated that less than 50 local businesses will qualify for this relief. Overall, the increase in business valuations has been 7.3 this time, compared with 9.3 in 2017 and 20.9 in 2010. As the local business rates billing authority, Surrey Heath Borough Council will be responsible for all the administration associated with this scheme, and that will be fully funded by central government. And as the scheme is beneficial to many local businesses and will cost us nothing, the proposition is that we adopt the scheme as set out in Annex A of the report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Perry. As you just say, my understanding is this is a government scheme, and what we're being asked to do right now is agree that we will run the government scheme.
Correct.
And it will be for the benefit of local businesses, and it's paid for by the central government. Okay, all right. And I see in the how much resource it's going to take is pretty minimal. So, okay. Any questions for Councillor Perry on this business rates relief scheme for small businesses? No. Okay. In which case then, members of the executive is advised to resolve that the council adopts 2023 Supporting Small Business Relief Scheme as set out in Annex A to this report. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay. Right, we're on to item 8. Right. Councillor Page would have done this, but unfortunately he's not with us, so I'll take the paper. I think for me, the bottom line is the planning department has improved enormously over the last 12 months. Right. One might link that to something that happened about 12 months ago. I would think. But there's no doubt about it that that department is now a high-performing department, whereas it was having a lot of difficulty before. The department has improved by bringing in new systems, recruiting more staff, retaining the staff and the skills that we've got, training up the staff that we've got. It's increased its efficiency enormously in how it deals with planning applications. Backlogs have gone down, and my personal favourite, customer service, has gone up. So much so that a review has identified 2 areas where we can offer an enhanced service to those who want it. What we know as pre-apps, pre-applications, where bigger developers are mostly interested, and fast track, where smaller developments and residents may want to use. Pre-app is where developers can come in, they talk to our planning specialists, and they discuss how their plans could better fit with the council's plans. And for that we charge. It's a service we're providing. They don't have to take it, but if they do, they have a much better chance of putting forward a good planning application. And with ordinary planning applications for smaller developments and residents, we can offer a fast track whereby all we're doing is we are reducing the lead time on items being evaluated for decision. I would stress that no one is buying the right decision. No one is paying for a yes. All right? What they're paying for is to get to the decision that would have been taken anyway, but it's done in a shorter time. And if that's a service they want to pay for, which we believe there's a number of people will, then that's more income to the council and a better service to those people who want it. And with pre-apps, again, it's a case of offering that service and charging for it. The charges are in the paper. I think one of the things that we discussed a lot with Councillor Page and Mr. China was you cannot have the fast track service so popular that it overwhelms the standard service, because people still do pay for the standard service, and if that's what they want, then we still have to achieve that. And I think we're going to achieve that in 2 ways. One is that the number of fast tracks that we will take on will be limited, so it's not everyone can change to fast track. There will only be a certain number of fast track tickets sold, ensuring that there's enough capacity to keep on top of the standard track. And also, it's going to be run as a pilot from April to December, and we'll take a view. Okay. And the charges, a lot of work has been done on looking at other boroughs and districts and seeing what they charge. And we are in amongst those charges, and I think that we're reasonable with the charges that we are proposing. But like all sales, we'll find out how the sales affects the throughput. Okay. I'm happy to try and answer any questions that anyone has. Councillor Edward Hawkins.
Thank you, Leader. You've actually clarified, and thank you for doing that, about the concerns on the process overwhelming the system. I think, as you know, the Vice Chairman and I had lengthy conversations with the head of planning on this, and we were supportive of this, although we did have some concerns, I say, that what's the expression, so the child started eating the parent or something along those lines. But thank you for the clarification, and that it is going to be a pilot and be reviewed in 6 months' time to see how matters progress. And I think it's a great system. We have, and as you say, we have some excellent staff on the planning team, and I think I look forward to seeing how it operates. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Whitcroft.
This might be a slightly sideways step. When quite some considerable time ago, we used to run a service whereby, and if I remember right, it was on a Tuesday morning for half an hour, whereby householders, as opposed to big commercial developers, were able to come along to reception at Surrey Heath House, and there would be a planning officer who they could just run the very basics past them and see obviously whether something was way out and, you know, worth proposing. I'm not suggesting that this is a service that should be available for, you know, big commercial, you know, big developers, but would it not cut the workload down a little bit for the obvious no's, so that they didn't have to go through, you know, an unrealistic planning application or even the pre-app? And the cost, as I say, it used to be half an hour on a Tuesday morning, and so it seems quite minimal to keep down the nonsense applications, because a lot of people do make, you know, don't fully understand the planning process and do therefore make these applications. I wondered if consideration could be given to perhaps reinstating that service. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitcroft. I'm guessing that service was before my time, because I don't remember. I've been here 8 years. I don't remember that.
Yeah,
but,
we're talking a long time ago.
Roughly, how long ago did we offer that service?
Councillor Bates might be able to throw some light on that.
Yeah. Let's go to the long-serving. Councillor Bates, do you remember that service?
I do. I couldn't tell you when it was. And to be honest, as most of you know, I've tended to give planning a bit of a wide berth because there are
it must be possibly, I mean, it must have gone sort of 10 years at least, I should think, but it was something that was just really helpful at the time. People really appreciated.
Okay, all right. Well, let me ask Mr. Chynau. I don't think there's much chance of us agreeing to put on a clinic or every Tuesday for half an hour, but it would be interesting to hear if a resident has just some basic questions about how to put in a planning application, what kind of assistance do we offer or could we offer?
So we offer a very basic service. So basically, if someone emailed some general sort of comments about is it permitted or do you need planning permission, we'd give general comments. But if you're basically going into a remit, I want to put a 5-metre deep extension on my property, or it's going to be a 2-storey side extension, or I'm in a conservation area or the building's listed, then we would advise them to go down the pre-application route. That's our standard sort of process. If you look at a lot of other Surrey authorities, they don't offer that sort of surgery sort of process where people come into the planning department and sit down with the planning officer. The standard process is to submit a pre-application to the council, and then we would give them the advice accordingly, and then they would submit the planning application afterwards.
Okay, but a planning application comes with a fee.
Yes, that's correct.
Right, okay. Okay, so I think taking Councillor Whitcroft's point, that was a service that we used to provide for free in the form of a clinic, but now you're providing it in the modern world in terms of emails and phone calls if people are doing that. So we don't turn them away like other councils do and say, just put in a planning application, pay your fee and we'll look at it. We actually do provide some very early basic advice, at least as Councillor Whitcroft said, to try and steer people in the right direction. They're not going to get a 6-storey extension on a 2-bedroom house.
Yeah, so when I say advice, it's very general advice. It's not basically looking at the policies and giving people, you've got to comply with policy 2, 3, 4. It's nothing like that. It's very, very general advice, basically.
Okay, Councillor Whitcroft, you got Mr. China's response?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just very mindful that the cost, if you're building a small but relatively small extension, by the time you've paid the cost for the pre-app, which is quite considerable, and then you've paid for the application itself, just as I say, for very basic information, to be able to sit in front of somebody and have that, I think would be quite valuable, obviously without having to, just that very basic start.
Sure.
And I just think it's perhaps something that we need to consider going forward.
Okay, I'm happy to take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bates?
Thank you. Yes, I suppose this isn't really a member matter, but I just want to flag a potential issue, which is highlighted in paragraph 5.2, which is in regard to where we are thinking about optional additional charges for specialist advice when we're dealing with individual officer posts. So I'm not going to name the officers that are put in there, but there's a difference between pre-application when we're talking about the council as a whole, and then pre-application when we're dealing with a specific named officer. My concern is when we have a specific named officer, in effect, what we're then doing is reprioritising already limited time. So where we obviously do that anyway with pre-app, you at least have an option with, if somebody is dealing with a case, to reallocate work to another colleague. You can't do that with specialist advice. So I guess my flag, and it's more for the head of paid service, I think, and the development manager and the head of planning, is I'm cautious of this, if I'm honest, when we're dealing with it on very specialist matters, when there is only one person doing it. So I do note what that final sentence says, but I think that's a risk, if I'm honest. If you want to take it, fine, but I think we do run the risk of other work. Whether this was what Councillor Hawkins was talking about earlier, I don't know, but I think that's perhaps a risky area. And just to kind of flag that up, if you want to go ahead, fine, but I'm not sure about it personally.
I think, Councillor Bates, you're right to flag that when you've got a department of 6 or 7, as you say, when somebody's busy, their colleagues can pick it up. But if you're a department of 1, you can't do exactly the same thing. So I do know from discussions with Councillor Page and Mr. China, head of planning, that they're very, very cognizant of the fact that one person could become overwhelmed if they're the only person doing the job. And they're very, very focused on making sure that pre-apps and any fast track, etc., if it does dig into their time, it's very, very limited how much of their time is going to go to that, and the rest of it has to stay on their standard job. But you're right, there's less flexibility with one. If we're spitballing, potentially this could be very successful, and in actual fact you could find that we could generate enough to bring on a second person. And that would certainly be something, because again it would make us a bit more robust, wouldn't it? We're always in danger if the single person leaves, we're without that service. And in today's employment market, it's difficult. But thank you. Okay. Right. Are there any other questions on this paper? Okay. I'm not seeing any. It was there, but it's gone. So, okay. Right. So So, members of the executive, we're advised to resolve that. One, the revised pre-application charging schedule takes effect from the 1st of April 23. And two, a fast-track planning application service for householder planning applications and applications for certificates of lawfulness be piloted from the 1st of April to the 31st of December 2023. Are we agreed? Thank you. Okay. We are now on to item 9, local community project fund bids. This, again, would have been Councillor Page, but I've had his notes. So there are two SIL bids. I'm going to just describe them as hard fought. Councillor Josephine Hawkins will know what I'm talking about. All right. These haven't been easy to bring forward, and I think I'm going to take that as an aside that that's something we need to work on. But there are two. One of the SIL bids is for 6,410 to be awarded to Parkside for the installation of an additional lamp and column to replace the 3 lamp heads on the existing columns to LED at Southcourt Park, Camberley. This is a health and safety issue. There is a club where people leave, single male, single females. They've got to get from the club to the car park, and it's not very well lit. And there's a definite feeling that obviously it would be safer if it was brighter, and that has my full support. And there's another one for St Michael's, the one that I declared for earlier, where we're looking at resurfacing of damaged tarmac pathways at the London Road Recreation Ground, 55k. This came about because I think I'm right in saying 95k was in the budget for repair of the tarmac around the perimeter of London Road Rec and through into where the tennis courts and the bowling green are. And the reason that the money needs to be spent is that there are a lot of trees. The trees have grown, the roots have grown, they've grown under the tarmac. And one of the things that's a bit of a shame is you don't have any photographs in this paper, but I've measured, and some of the tarmac uplift is in the order of 8 inches. And it means that wheelchairs, buggies, bikes, scooters cannot go around the path. They've got to actually go off the path to get round it. And there are at least 30 locations around the park where this is needed. So the budget of 95 was allocated for repair, and that left, from the quote, it left another 55 needed to do the whole park. And it struck me as not a very good thing to do, where we'd go put new tarmac down in something like 60, 70% of the footpaths and not do the other 30% and make the whole thing look right and do it all once, and it's probably good for another 10 or 20 years. So the SIL was allocated, and that's why I supported the 55 coming from SIL. St Michael's, I think, has 44k, so it will be using the pooling system to take 11k from the pooling system, which is exactly, of course, what it was meant for. Okay, I'm happy to try and answer questions on those two. Councillor Garrett?
That's the one. Sorry, apologise. Thank you, Leader. I totally agree, because we took the dog for a walk over there the other week and it was a bit like that. It's an interesting point, because I'm not sure from the paper, what are we going to do about the trees? Because obviously there are the roots, and do the trees get removed? What happens with those? And actually, just a point on what you said about pictures, I'm just wondering if sometimes in future it might be handy to have pictures, because having been there, if you see a picture, it certainly makes it a lot more easy to understand.
Okay, thank you. I agree to the second point. As the old saying, not a tree was harmed in the making of this tarmac path. When we walk the path, effectively it's going to be like a speed hump. So the root has grown from the tree under the path, it's lifted the tarmac. The tarmac will be cut back, the root will be protected, and then the tarmac will be laid in a sufficient hump that hopefully a walker, cyclist, wheelchair wouldn't notice. It's not going to be a speed bump that slows you down, it's going to be a hump over the thing, okay? And then that begs the question, well, wouldn't the tree root still continue to, and the answer is yes, but they put something under the tarmac which protects or slows down the root heading upwards and more outwards. Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions on the things? Councillor Josephine Hawkins.
Thank you. I was just making sure I wasn't on mute. Thank you. I'm more than happy not obviously not in future, but I would have been happy to supply lots of photographs of a missing light. It has, as you say, been a challenge. It's been quite strenuous. It's been quite difficult, and I appreciate all the help I've had on this. Basically, I was approached by the lady captain, or the female captain of the tennis club, who said that she and many of her colleagues, male and female, felt vulnerable going to the car park. There was no lights in the car park at Southcote Park. There are 3 lights along the footpath, which are owned by the tennis club, and so they pay for them. We have been trying to look at lighting in the car park from the corner to going along the edge, which would have impacted upon residents. And we found that this was the best location. We have had the police look at it, and they think it's also an ideal location. And I'm pleased to say no trees will be harmed with the construction of this. So that is a plus. And I'm grateful that it is now coming to the executive, hopefully for approval. I'm just disappointed it's not 60,000 or something like that. So we could have used a bit more of our SILAP, but every little helps. So I'm grateful for any support it may receive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Okay, if there are no more questions on that. Okay, so members of the executive were advised to resolve that in line with the SIL bids detailed in Annex 1, 6,410 net be awarded to Parkside Ward for the installation of an additional lamp and column, and to replace the 3 lamp heads on the existing columns to LED at Southcote Park, Camberley, and 55k, number 2, 55k net be awarded to St Michael's Ward for the resurfacing of damaged tarmac pathways at London Road Recreation Ground. Are we agreed? Thank you. Okay. Item 10. Deanside Playground refurbishment. This was Councillor Jennings-Evans' paper. Unfortunately, she's unwell and can't make it. So this is a relatively straightforward paper. We have Section 106 funding in a reserve. That funding came from Accent, or its predecessor. We've used a very large chunk of it on refurbishing other play parks in the Old Dean estate. This is a use it or lose it budget. If we don't spend it on what it's intended to, then we are duty bound to give it back to Accent. And this has been identified as a very good use for it, and it makes it for all of the rules. The rules are it can only be spent in Old Dean, it can only be on capital, and it must be in the Section 106 list. The playground is very well used. It's 20 years old. It's been maintained, but frankly, it's at the end of its life, and it's time that we had a new one, and these funds will go a long way towards that. Okay. I'm happy to try and answer any questions. Okay. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Leader. I'm just happy to support this. It is an older-looking playground. It is quite heavily used, and I look forward to the consultation coming through in the near future, so residents can have input into how they would like the new playground to look. So I'd just like to support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bates.
And I agree.
All right. Never want to use 50 words when 2 will do. thank you. Okay. I said I think it was a bit of a straightforward, you know, it's always good to be able to take money that is for its purpose and get it used. So. Okay, so the recommendation, members of the executive advised to recommend to full council, number one, permission be granted to draw down 94,000 from the Section 106 reserve for this development to refurbish the playground at Deanside to ensure the local children continue to play in a safe and secure space. These funds be added to the capital programme and authority to spend the contingency budget be delegated to the Strategic Director of Finance and Customer Services in consultation with the portfolio holder for Finance and Customer Services. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay. Is that an old hand, Councillor Bates? Oh, thank you. Right, item 11 is a supplementary paper, if you want to find it, and it is the Coronation Grant Scheme. Right, and this would have been Councillor Croke's paper. I should be getting paid overtime for this. Okay. Right. So we have a slight dilemma because of the timing of this. Let me explain. Naturally, a lot of our residents will want to celebrate the coronation, which is the 6th of May. And the Palace has asked that events be held on the 7th of May. There's no problem with that, and this council, as it's always done with the Jubilee, etc., would want to be involved. And so the way we have, we're proposing to be involved this time and support residents is to create a small fund, £8,000, and people can apply if they want to put on a coronation event. Now, most of the time that will maybe be a street party or something, a picnic, something of that ilk, but we would allocate £250 as a grant to them for them to then effectively pump prime to do the event, and that way we're supporting it. The wrinkle is that there's an election on the 4th of May, and that drives the date for Purda, which is the 23rd of March, and as members will know, grants can be made by the council after that date, but the decision to make the grant cannot be made after that date. So we're at Purda the 23rd of March, and we believe a lot of people will really start thinking about street parties, etc., in late March, early April, a month before the event, in which case then we'd be caught. Right? We couldn't then decide on a grant. So this paper suggests that we go to an organisation that is used to awarding small grants, and in this case our friends at the Rotary have agreed to administer the scheme for us. They will be given the £8,000. They will, any applications for grants for up to £250 will go to them. We will oversee the administration of that with a council officer. And they are to see that the recipient meets the criteria mentioned in 3.2. It has to be within the borough, it has to be intergenerational, it has to be bringing people together, a minimum of 20, it has to be inclusive, etc. Right? There was some talk of whether it should be only to charities or registered CIOs, etc. But the point of this is to have residents be able to do it. So a person in a street, a cul-de-sac, wants to take it on, we can give them up to £250 in order to pump right. It's going to cost more than that, but that will get it started with buying bunting or paper plates or food or whatever. And hopefully we'll have parties and coronation events all across the borough, and the council will be seen to be supporting that, quite rightly. All right. One of the things that we would add in here is itch, which is that we would like some photographs of the actual event. I should point out there is a risk, albeit I think a small risk, that someone could apply to the Rotary for up to £250 for an event and the event not happen. In which case, then we have overseen the theft of £250 of council money. But I think there are enough safeguards in place that are, appropriate to a grant of £250 that will do it. The paper talks about spot checks. It talks about meeting criteria. It talks about talking to ward councillors. Frankly, we'd probably go to the events anyway, wouldn't we? So I think the risk is absolutely minimal, and I think it's a good thing for the council to be doing. And to be honest, I wasn't sure how we could do it because of Purda, and well done to the officers for coming up with a way of being able to do it in amongst the coronation happening 2 days after election with Purda, etc. So I think it's a good paper that actually does a good job of getting the grants out there. Okay. I'm happy to answer questions. Councillor Bates?
Thank you. I thought I'd save my words for this one, if that's okay. So I think it's a good idea to obviously celebrate the coronation, but I'm not sure why we need to further the scheme. We have a ward councillor allocation scheme where people can apply to get money for events and activities and things. I think what the way of getting around Purda, I think, is very good. So I do share your enthusiasm regarding that and to work things through for that. My biggest concern, I suppose, is in regard to the criteria. And I hate to go back to a subject that has been a bit sensitive over the last few weeks, but I would want to add one more, which is that I don't think that we should be paying for alcohol for these events. I think we should be paying for bunting or whatever, road closure notices and things like that. But I do think if we would, I think that's for residents themselves to go and buy alcohol themselves, because otherwise we would be not promoting well-being. We may not be inclusive. So I think I would want to see that added in personally. I'm all for celebrating. I do it, in my own capacity, in my charity as well, and in communities. But I don't think the council should be giving £250 to people to have a booze up, basically, no matter if it's the King's coronation or anything else. Have a community event, have a picnic, great idea, fantastic, bringing people together. But the alcohol bit should be paid by others, in my opinion.
Right. I'm getting nods from the executive. I agree, Councillor Bates. I think it's a good stipulation. We can put in there, I've just done itch, so it's it's going to have to be that the recipient of the grant agrees that none of the grant will be spent on alcohol. Okay? We're not saying alcohol is not available, cannot be available at the event. Of course it can, right? But they just have to agree. That's going to have to be as much as it can be, because I'm not going to be able to police that. We're not asking for receipts for the £250. Where they want to put on a thing. We wanted to make this as simple as possible, that as many people as possible who want to put on something get some help from the council. Okay, so that was where I think we can give 32 grants, can't we, of £250? All right, and I'd be happy to see all of them go. But we just agree that the recipient agrees that the £250 cannot be used for the purchase of alcohol. All right, along with the photographs required. Your first point, though, Councillor Bates, that was actually our starting point. Why don't we just use the ward councillor scheme? But it became actually overly complicated. If you remember the scheme, it is very, very much aimed at CIOs and charities. You've got to have a bank account. You've got to have 2 signatories. You've got to have a constitution. There's a lot of rules around the ward councillor scheme. And we started by, can't we just put in a temporary adjustment to the ward councillor scheme? And frankly, this simple temporary adjustment became more complicated than this paper you've got in front of you now. All right? What if a ward councillor, for instance, had given all of their grant already? Okay, and this was new money coming from comp. So it was exactly where we started, but we decided this paper was a better idea. Okay, Councillor Bates, is that okay?
Yeah, I think the alcohol was the main concern, so you dealt with that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Whitcroft.
Yes, would you mind, please? It doesn't specify in the paper. Rotary is obviously an international organisation. in Surrey Heath, we have two. We have Camberley Rotary and we have Surrey Heath Rotary, for reasons I'm not going to go into. But could you confirm, please, which of the two it is?
The original one.
It's Camberley.
Right. Okay. Lovely.
It's Charles. It's Camberley.
Right.
Charles Barber.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
The other thing is, I do agree with the alcohol comment, and I would also, going back to Councillor Bates's point about the ward councillor scheme, when you and I were discussing this originally, you did also make the point that it's very possible that we won't be councillors having awarded the money. It wasn't possible to do that, bearing in mind that we may not be councillors on the day. I think that was one of the fundamental points that you made to me when we discussed it.
Yeah, we couldn't make grants after we're no longer councillors, right? And of course, the ward councillor grant scheme, we had to actually make the decision, and we couldn't make the decision because of Purda. So everything was rolled up against using the ward councillor scheme.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Councillor Alloway.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. But the council award grant scheme still could be used if we've got funds, I understand. And if you could just remind me when the scheme runs, from what date it ends to beginning of the next. So if it runs on financial years like April, end of March, I think, then we could theoretically get another wodge of grant money from the end of March, and we could spend that quickly.
Right.
just in case we don't get back.
So yeah, so Purda is the 23rd of March. Right. You're right. The financial year ends in the beginning of April. Right. So you're not going to get another grant until after the 4th of May. Right. And I know, Councillor Alloway, you're a shoo-in, so you'll be a councillor next year, but some of us are a bit more nervous about whether we'll be councillors or not. But we won't have another grant until next term. Okay, and by the rules, what's best practice is you do not give grants for after you're potentially finished as a councillor. Okay. I just two quick points. 3.3, it's an interesting wording. Okay, applications for grants will be submitted to the selected third party from Surrey Heath residents or community groups who have a long track record of administering small grant payments. Right. That makes it sound like we will only give grants to residents or community groups who have a long track record of administering small grant payments. Okay. All right, we just need a bit of punctuation in there to make it clear that this is, we're selecting a community group who have a long track record of administering it, all right, for residents. All right, this is aimed actually at residents being able to just quickly get hold of a bit of funds in order to pump prime their party or their event, okay? And the other thing is, it's not mentioned in here as far as I can see, but hopefully, the Rotary will disperse the 8K for us. But if there's any left over, the remaining funds should be returned to the council. All right? Not that they would, but I don't want there to be any incentive to not disperse the funds because they get to keep whatever's left over. Okay? So whatever's left over gets returned to the council. So that needs to be in there as well. So with that amendment, all right, I think we're there on questions. So, all right. Members of the executive were advised to resolve that a scheme of small grants, £250 each, to a maximum cost of the council of £8,000 is approved for application to support local communities in marking the coronation of King Charles III on the 7th of May 2023. And the criteria for the award of grants through the Coronation Grant Scheme be adopted as set out in paragraph 3.2 as amended, including the point that any surplus funds are returned to the council. Are we agreed? Oh, and one of the amendments being can't be used for the alcohol. Okay, thank you. Right. Oh, you okay? Oh, sorry, we've got a late hand. Councillor Wheeler?
It does pertain to this, but not to the decision. I just wondered when there would be a press release going out on this.
As soon as possible isn't an answer. Right. Okay. Right. Press release will be no later than Friday. This Friday of this week. Okay. Right. Okay, we're back onto the main paper. That was a supplement, right? Okay. Item 12, Public Realm Task and Finish Group Report. Okay, so this is my paper. All right. The Task and Finish Group was set up to do two things. One was to check if anything had been done incorrectly in managing the contract, any risk management or mitigation of the overspend of the public realm, and by the public realm we meant the High Street project. It also was there to determine what lessons could be learned, and the Task and Finish Group has made 10 recommendations. Unfortunately, I believe this is a case of events having overtaken the committee. In the year and a half they have been reviewing this, we have actually, with the officers and the executive, we've identified and implemented best practice in project managing projects like this, and in our rules it's £1 million plus. Any project over £1 million or more is regarded as a major project, and it now follows the new best practice rules. And so we're working to the recommendations that the Task and Finish Group have made already. So what I propose is that we simply adopt the recommendations en bloc, adding the £1 million for the project so that it's recorded. And I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Leader. I'm just making sure that this isn't a typing error, is it? This is the 8th of September 2021. This is when it went originally to PNF.
Yes.
Okay.
The PNF, well, it went to PNF before that, but that's when PNF held their meeting and decided to commission a Task and Finish Group to look at this issue.
May I ask then, moving forward, because that seems like a very, very long period of time between when it was originally bought and the date that we are finding ourselves in now, and as you say, a lot of the recommendations have already been put in process anyway. Is there any way that this can be looked at to maybe speed anything like this up moving forward? Because it does seem to be a very long period of time for this to come back to us.
I don't think we can put anything in place or say in the Constitution that a Task and Finish Group has to finish in a certain time. The Task and Finish Group works for the PNF committee, and that is the chair's prerogative to decide how long the Task and Finish Group are given. Okay. All right. Okay. Are there any questions on this? No? Councillor Bates?
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't going to comment on this, but as that has just been raised, I think I will. Look, I did raise at the committee this had taken quite a long time to come back, and I think, in fairness, obviously the chair may be on the call. I'm not sure he's done the call or not, but I think there was some initial confusion regarding the governance and how Task and Finish groups actually work. So as to who was leading on this work, etc. I think there may be some internal. It's not a criticism of anybody, but I just think for the new council going forward, and I think in fairness the committee did actually highlight this, I think that might be helpful as a training point for councillors. This was not delayed either by officers or members, but I think there was some confusion regarding who or how this should be taken forward. It shouldn't have taken as long as it has, but it has. I'm more interested, I think, in the actual recommendations, and I will highlight the same three, which I think are important, as I mentioned at the Scrutiny Committee, which are 8, 9 and 10. The whole point of this task and finish group, which, if you remember, I was the one raising it at the time, was because we did a large amount of public money was committed by this council without going through the appropriate authority at the time. Now, it did subsequently get the appropriate authority, but at the time it did not. And we were committed to the tune of £750,000. That shouldn't have happened. We've identified, or there's been outline as to how that may have happened and whatever. Various individuals who may have been responsible for that or involved in some way are no longer here. So there's not much we can do in relation to that. But from a financial governance point of view, this was poor and it shouldn't have happened. So I'm pleased to see, as you've rightly highlighted, there have been some changes. There was a delay, as is outlined in number 8. Number 9, we do need to make sure internal audit are made aware a lot earlier than they were. And number 10 remains very concerning in regard to the fact that various correspondences were not available, which could have thrown a light on this. And that's not great. But again, that was discussed at the Scrutiny Committee, so I don't think necessarily we need to highlight it much more. But I'm pleased if you want to move forward on these recommendations, because this was actually a lot of money and it shouldn't have happened, and it did happen. And I hope lots of learning points have been made as a result.
Well, thank you, Councillor Bates. I'm afraid I think you can look back on how things were done and say things could be done better, but they weren't done badly at the time. Right? Yes, we would have liked to have not have spent the extra money, but there was mitigation of why the extra money was spent. The procedures were followed. I think it even says it in something like number 7. Right? There was no evidence of any, there was no proper risk identification, mitigation or management of the project. Right? There was no evidence that it was mismanaged. Yes, there was an overspend, and you could point to that and say, well, the overspend itself is evidence that it's been done, but projects go over and how they're handled. What I would say is I agree with you that the way that we are now managing them is far better. Right? But I don't think we should kid ourselves. The new rules do not mean that we're never, ever going to overspend. It just means, in most cases, that we're going to be much more aware of the fact that overspends happen, and it's going to be brought to the attention of members far more quickly. Right. I always like to give you the last word, Councillor Bates.
Well, thank you. There's not going to be much more opportunity for this, but the financial procedures were categorically not followed, and it's just factually inaccurate to say that they were. That's not to suggest that overspends don't occur, but the issue was and has always been that of the governance and how decisions were made in regard to that. That has always been this issue. Those were not followed at the time. Now, they should have been. No one's suggesting any personal impropriety or anything of that nature. But the whole point of this coming forward is that decisions were made that were outside the governance structure of this council and how decisions were made. And that has always been this issue. It should have been reported at the time. Councillors should have been the ones who'd made that decision within the authority. There could have been an urgent action or whatever it should have been, but none of those things happened. And that's always been the issue. It's not been the fact that they overspend with utility works and stuff like that. It was the governance issue of this, which is why that was the problem. That has hopefully been addressed, and we won't now have that again.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Malvagnam.
Can I give it to Sharon Galliford? She had a hand first.
Thank you.
Oh.
Can you hear me? Sorry, my camera's not working properly. Just to say that as a member of the working group, there was no intention on our behalf to delay this at all, nor from the officers, but other council business constantly kept taking precedent. Hence, we were delayed in gathering information and having the reports written. We did bear in mind, obviously, that other other procedures had changed in the meantime, but I think the report is still very valid. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Mavaginem.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, I agree with all what Rodney Bates said. As Councillor Bates said, fundamentally, the process was not followed and the governance was very poor. I mean, it is a fact of life. It's history and we have learned a lot. That's the whole point of that exercise, but it's taken longer than agreed. And I thank Councillor Bates and Councillor Victoria Wheeler for pushing it back and back and back, and rightly so. It had to be done, and it had to be done properly. There were, on 3 occasions, the reports are produced, and as a chair, I'm sort of looking at it and thinking, are we done? But in fact, it should have gone to the other 3 task and finish groups. So I take the point, what Councillor Bates said. I think we should set the process where every task and finish group, the process they should take. It doesn't matter who the chair is, or the leader of the Performance and Finance Committee is. A process is set and that needs to be followed rigorously. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Mavaginem. I think I've just confirmed the task and finish group is actually in the Constitution. But I think, to be fair, I think the Governance Working Group has added that relatively recently in the revamp of the whole Constitution. Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Leader. It's really just to reiterate, I think that it's highlighted a number of issues. It's training for officers and the decision-making process and where that sits. It's training for councillors, and that's councillors that sit not so much on the working groups, but on the committees that review that to make sure that the right processes are followed. I don't think everyone has the Constitution published out and is poured over in quite the same way as certainly a couple of us seem to do in order to make sure that we're on track. So I think that would also be helpful, but also a reminder to members of the executive and the portfolio holders that they are meant to be present at the committee meetings in order to present back when it concerns their portfolio. So there are 3 core things really that I think we've learned from this exercise, and this particular report finally coming back has taken a very long time. So I think we need to look to ourselves as well as to the council as a whole and officers' advice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As regards training, I think that's a good point, and I think the officers will take that on board in terms of looking at induction training and training for officers when it members when it comes to working groups. You just mentioned there about portfolio holders showing up to, I think you mean Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee meetings when their portfolio is being discussed. I think I'm right in saying that any portfolio holder who has been formally invited with some notice has actually shown up at every single meeting. Right? We have had, I know I've been invited on the day of the meeting. Right? Other portfolio holders have been invited on the day of the meeting. There has been some confusion as to whether an invitation was meant to be sent or not, and people were saying that we have been invited when we hadn't been. I can just be clear, the portfolio holders are more than happy to show up and discuss their portfolio at every single Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee meeting that they are discussing their portfolio. Right? But it's not a case that we're not showing up because we don't want to. Often the invite hasn't come or it's too late for us to actually come.
Then maybe again we can add that to the list of training items later for the way in which the protocol for invitations.
Yeah, I'd be happy to see that. Councillor Whitcroft.
Sorry, I'm a little bit confused. If there's a paper that comes up to P&F on a certain portfolio, surely when the portfolio holders, along with the rest of us, receive the agendas for the P&F minutes, for the P&F meetings, they'd have a look through that, pick up the fact that there's a paper being discussed on their portfolio and accept that they need to attend. Thank you.
So there's 2 different matters there. Not that it's anything to do with the paper we're discussing, but if the chair wants to effectively discuss the portfolio with the portfolio holder, then 1 or 2 portfolio holders are invited to the meetings and they go along. Okay? And as far as I'm concerned, as leader of the council, that's compulsory. Right? You better have a very, very good reason for not attending that meeting. Right? And as to best of my knowledge, every portfolio who's been invited to be discussed their portfolio with PNF has gone along. Then there's another group where you may be discussing something, let's say finance, all right? But it's not an interview of the finance portfolio holder, it's a financial item on the agenda. It is not appropriate for members of the executive to just roll up to the PNF committee. We must be invited by the chair, because it could be seen as undue influence on a committee that is actually scrutinising the decisions of the executive. So we can't just show up to meetings and try and influence the committee that is in actual fact scrutinising our performance. We must be invited by the chair. And to the best of my knowledge, when we're invited by the chair in enough time to actually arrange your diary, then we have shown up.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I think we are there on the task and finish groups. So members of the executive, the committee therefore advises the executive to resolve that the findings and recommendations of the task and finish group presented to the PNF scrutiny committee on the 25th of January be noted, and 2, the recommendations set out at section 2 of this report be approved for adoption by officers when managing significant, and I'm going to put brackets, £1 million plus contracts and projects. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, that takes us to exclusion of press and public. So I'd like to thank any members of the public and for any reason the press, okay, of why they would come here once again.